So dudes, it's your boy 2. In my previous videos, I've talked about how I've played a lot of gacha games, right, over the years, and still do, by the way. And because I'm more of a fan of gacha games in general, not just any one in particular, I'm personally invested in seeing the evolution of gacha games, if you will, and the direction that they're headed. So that got me thinking, how exactly have gacha games changed over the years so far, right? Many of you guys may not know what gacha games were like before Genshin Impact, so what are the key differences between old school and new school gachas? Not to mention I was a history major back in college, God forbid, so for the sake of finally giving my dusty ass diploma some purpose, I think it'd be pretty cool to document in video form how gachas have evolved over time. And again, given how many gachas I keep up with, there's no better content creator to do that than yours truly. First, for context, let me lay out a chronology of all the gacha games I've ever played. This includes the ones that I've tried out, but no longer play too. My first gacha ever was the NA server for Fate Grand Order, and that came out in 2017. Next were Girls Frontline Global and Azure Lane Global in 2018, Magia Record Global in 2019, Arknights Global and Genshin Impact in 2020, Touhou Lost Word Global and Blue Archive Global in 2021, Nikke Goddess of Victory in 2022, Honkai Star Rail, Ether Gazer, and Snowbreak Containment Zone in 2023, and finally, Wuthering Waves and Zenless Zone Zero in 2024. Couple disclaimers. First, obviously gacha games have existed for a while before I myself got into them. Realistically speaking, I started playing back when the era of old school gacha games was on its way out, and the era of new school gacha games was starting to replace them. This means that my knowledge of old school gachas is mostly limited to the ones that I've played myself, and that there can be older gacha games out there, or other old school gachas that did do things a little bit differently. Second, out of all the gacha games that I currently play, I consider Arknights to be the start of the new school gacha era, because that's the first gacha that I picked up that have many of the features that I would consider to be new school. This means that the three old school gachas that I still play are FGO, Girls Frontline, and Azure Lane. So let's get into this. What separates the new school gacha games from the old school ones? From my experience, there are three main things: pity, or a gacha guarantee mechanic, inventory and character mechanics, and everyone's favorite, grinding. First up, pity, the mechanic that gives you whatever the top rarity character is after you've rolled like a certain amount of times on a banner without getting a 5-star or whatever, right? If a new gacha game comes out these days and it doesn't have a pity mechanic, well, good luck getting anybody to start playing it. But having no pity used to be reality for old school gacha games. Back in my day, during the heyday of what was basically the Wild West of gacha games, I suppose you could say, there was no such thing as pity, at least not for a lot of old school games. It was either you got who you wanted or you didn't, right? If you did, great. If not, you better start swiping, buddy, or you can go fuck yourself. I mean, technically that hasn't changed, but at least with new school gachas, you know that there's a hard limit to how much you have to swipe to get like a maxed out character, or however many copies of a character you're looking to get. But with a lot of old school gacha games, especially back in the day, nah bruh, nah, you just didn't. Like, you didn't know when the pain would end. For example, in FGO, the 5-star servant pull rate is 1%, and its old rate of used to be 70%, so back in the day, it used to be a 0.7% chance to pull a rate-up 5-star character, and with no pity. This means that rolling gacha in this game has always been a complete crapshoot, even after the rate-up got buffed to 0.8%, and they increased the multi-roll from giving you 10 rolls to 11. You can luck the fuck out and get what you want in a single ticket, or basically a single roll, or you can be a friend of mine who had to spend almost 3,300 Saint Quartz for a single copy of Abigail back in the day, which in dollar terms comes out to be around $1,580. And gentle reminder, that should be more expensive than going for a C6 or E6 character or whatever, and a copy of the signature equipment in a Hoyoverse game for a single copy of a rate-up 5-star character in FGO. Girls Frontline works a little differently. It has what's called a construction gacha, which is a gacha system that was more popular with old school gacha games like Kantai Collection, if you remember that. Instead of gacha currency, you have resources that are used for a variety of mechanics, including rolling gacha. And to do that, you have to input recipes that have a chance of getting what you're looking for. Here's the problem. There was no pity. And because it's a construction gacha, right, where you can input your own custom recipes if you want, the rates aren't listed anywhere. Matter of fact, I still don't know what GFL's official rates even are. So just like in FGO, you could spend all your resources trying to get a new character and not get them. Even worse, there's also another character gacha in this game that's literally 10 times more expensive than the regular ones, I shit you not, where you roll for a specific class of characters that you can only get from there, the shotguns that is. And that gacha also has no pity. Basically, imagine if in Star Rail, for example, the preservation characters are locked behind a separate gacha banner that costs you 16,000 Stellar J's to roll, and you have no pity. And that's heavy construction gacha in GFL. Granted, that's not technically a fair comparison because obtaining resources in GFL is far easier than getting Stellar J's in Star Rail, but let me tell you, man, having played this game for far longer than I should have, I sincerely hope that none of you guys ever have to experience the void that is this specific gacha called heavy construction. Azure Lane surprisingly has a really generous gacha, not just for old school games, but just gacha games in general, 7% for SSRs actually. However, the actual rate up rate is only 2%, meaning that most of your SSR rolls from any particular limited time banner will usually be not who you're looking for, unfortunately, which means that sometimes it can take a frustratingly long time to get who you actually want, even with a 7% SSR rate. Oh, and as usual, there's no pity, so it's just you, your resources, and your luck to determine whether or not you get the characters you actually want. The first gacha that I play that included pity as part of its gacha from launch is Arknights. Its 6-star operator rate is 2%, with the usual rate of being half that at 1%, but the way its pity works is that every roll you do that doesn't get you a 6-star increases your 6-star chance little by little until you're guaranteed a 6-star roll, though unfortunately it doesn't guarantee you the rate up. And every gacha game that I picked up afterwards features a pity mechanic of some kind. Genshin and the other Hoyoverse games have their soft and hard pities, right? Alternating guaranteed rate ups, where if you get spooked on character banner, your next 5 stars guaranteed, and this applies to Star Rail's and Z3's weapon banners as well. And pity build up, where the game remembers, right, how many rolls you've done towards your next 5-star and lets it roll over to the next banner when they change. Aether Gazer, Snowbreak, and Wuwa all follow this Hoyoverse style gacha model as well. Blue Archive and Nikke have the Spark style pity system, where every roll that you do also gets you a ticket or a token of some kind that you can then spend on obtaining the rate up character directly if you accumulate enough of those tickets or tokens or whatever. Nikke has the superior version, as it lets you keep those tickets when banners change, meaning that you can instantly pity a new rate up SSR character the moment they come out if you already have enough. And this counts for collab characters too, by the way, which is insane that they let you do that, whereas in Blue Archive, you have to use your points before the current banner expires, or else you effectively waste them. As time went by, pity mechanics have also evolved for a lot of gacha games. Early on, for example, Arknights added its own spark mechanic for limited character banners, where every roll gives you, again, that special token that you can exchange directly for rate up characters or even previous limited characters if you accumulate enough of them. And they've even added special banners that, for example, guarantee you a 6-star operator that you don't have when you roll them, among others. Even MiHoYo slowly updated their own pity systems by first giving their Genshin weapon banner an actual pity, even if it still sucks, and they improved the weapon banners in their subsequent games by putting only one weapon on rate up, thank god, and giving you 75-25 odds of getting it. Wuthering Waves takes us a big step further though by giving their limited weapon banner a 100% rate up guarantee. Hell, they even separated their perma characters from the perma weapons, right, by making 2 separate banners for them. And for the perma weapon banner, they let you set which weapon you want to roll for with its own 100% rate up guarantee, meaning that both weapon banners in Wuwa are much more worth it for players to roll on compared to the MiHoYo games. Aether Gazer takes this further with its recent limited character banners, which have a guaranteed rate up after 90 pulls, and its weapon banner, or their equivalent of it at least, allows you to roll for the special gear or equipment of characters anytime you want, even for limited characters. And Snowbreak takes this even further by not only giving its limited character and weapon banners guaranteed rate ups, but also every 130 30 rolls or so that you do for the limited character banners, you can select a batch of tokens for a specific permanent SSR character that you want. Same thing for the limited weapon banners, except instead of tokens, you can just straight up choose a whole new permanent orange tier weapon. Hell, even the old school gachas have implemented their own pity mechanics into their banners as a way to sort of like keep up with the times. Ever since Azure Lane started doing ultra rare banners, the UR characters have only a 1% pull rate, but they also come with a 20 multi spark, where after 20 multi rolls, no matter what you got, you can redeem a copy of the rate up ultra rare, no questions asked. More recently, they've even included this 20 multi-spark into their standard banners too, as they've put some of the older ultra-rare characters at this point as part of the permanent pools, and you can even select which UR character you want when you hit the spark. However, this pity only exists for the ultra-rare characters. While you can directly obtain the older SSRs and SRs from shops, some of them at least, there is still no pity system for new banner SSRs and SRs. It's basically the same as it was 6 years ago. Girls Frontline has also included what they call an anchored construction, I think it is, which acts like a pity in that you are guaranteed to obtain the character that you want from a batch of new characters. However, I say like a pity because it's still pretty shit for a pity since it only works for one unit, and once it's used up, it's gone and you can't anchor another unit. And there are typically at least 4 or 5 new characters in a batch. FGO is also unfortunately the same way. Matter of fact, it's since gotten the most atrocious excuse of a pity I've ever seen any gacha game have. How it works is this: you are guaranteed a copy of the rate up 5-star servant of any particular banner after 30 multi-rolls. And mind you, the standard among the gacha games that I play where, you know, they have the style of pity is usually 20, right? Which is the case for Azure Lane, Nikkei, and Blue Archive. Only Arknights also has a 30 multi-spark pity. It used to be until very recently that FGO's pity only worked once, as in you were only guaranteed one copy of the rate up 5-star on banner. And even worse, if you got that copy early, before you did your full 30 multi-rolls, then the game counts that early copy as your pity, and now it's gone. And if you want more copies after that, you're on your own. As of JPFGO's 9th anniversary, they've updated it so that apparently pity is now repeatable. Thank God it's not just for your first copy anymore. But it's still 30 multi-rolls to hit pity in the first place, and it took 9 fucking years for this game to finally get a pity that's worth calling a pity. Oh, and before I forget, FGO's pity also doesn't carry over, meaning that the whole building pity strategy that you can do in like the Hoyoverse games, for example, does not work in FGO. Old school games will stay old school, I guess. Second is the inventory and character mechanics, specifically how gacha games handle your character inventories and certain character mechanics like deploying dupe units and their rarities. In old school gacha games, it was common to have finite inventories that hold your units, and if you have too many units, you'd be capped out and wouldn't be able to play the game until you cleared out your inventory and made some space. FGO, GFL, and Azure Lane all have this inventory mechanic. Thankfully, FGO lets you expand your inventory using in-game currency, or in other words for free, though with quite a bit of grind. But GFL and Azure Lane both require you to spend premium currency to do the same. Granted, these games do give you some free gems, so you can spend those on, expand your inventory, I guess. But remember, these are gacha games, and new characters are always coming out all the time, right? So running out of inventory space can be a very real concern that you might be forced to deal with eventually. A silver lining of sorts, if you can even call it that, of having an inventory style like this though, is that you are allowed to have and even oftentimes use dupes of the same character. This doesn't really apply to FGO though, since the game doesn't allow you to bring 2 of the same unit of your own on the same team, only if one of them is a support, or in other words, if that character belongs to another player, which ironically is how you'll be playing that game most of the time anyway. Where they are relevant though are in GFL and Azure Lane and other gachas like them. In Azure Lane, as long as they're not part of the same fleet, and as long as you're not doing the upside game mode, you can have 2 separate fully invested dupes, one in each fleet, going around kicking ass. GFL takes us to a ridiculous level, because in this game, you can have up to 10 different squads called echelons. Just like on Azure Lane, the game doesn't let you have dupes of the same unit in the same echelon, but as long as they're in different squads, hey, no problem. And given GFL's extremely meta-driven gameplay, where you either abuse the top tiers or you just fucking die, it's not uncommon to see high-ranking players have like a copy of like P22, for example, in as many squads as they can. You don't really see this in new school gacha games, for better or for worse. All the gachas I play starting with Arknights onwards do not have a character inventory. When you roll a new character or obtain one, you just get them and they're added to your account directly, end of story. There's no need to buy like extra inventory space or shit like that, at least not for characters. For weapons and miscellaneous materials though, that might be a different story depending on the game. But that also means that it's impossible to have two or more separate dupes of the same character, meaning that you can't just throw Bennett onto both sides of Spiral Abyss. Sorry Genshin players, I know you'd fucking kill to do that. And whatever extra copies you do get are just automatically converted into like character tokens or something. I should also add this tidbit, it's possible for you to delete your own characters in older gacha games, even ones you have completely maxed out. And there have been incidents of people accidentally deleting characters that they didn't mean to, just because they weren't paying attention. So at least in newer games, you don't have to worry about doing this, because you can't really like delete any character that you've obtained at all. Like you can only get rid of like equipment and like materials or whatever. Oh, and almost forgot about character rarities. Old school gacha games typically have lots of different rarities. FGO rarity, for example, goes from 1 star all the way up to 5 star. There's even a joke character in the game who's officially listed as a 0 star, but functionally acts like a 2 star. Girls Frontline is similar, with its lowest rarity being 2 star and goes up to 5 star naturally, though some 5 star units can hit 6 star rarity if they have a mod 3 upgrade available. Azure Lane rarity goes from common, then rare, then super rare or SR, then super special rare or super rare or whatever, basically SSR, and then finally ultra rare or decisive if they're from PR. New school gacha games typically only have like a couple of rarities comparatively. All the Hoyoverse games and others that take directly from Hoyoverse like Ether Gazer, Snowbreak, and Wuwa only have 2 rarities for characters at least, 4 star and 5 star. Some newer gachas have 3, Blue Archive has 1, 2, and 3 stars, and Nikkei has rares, SRs, and SSRs, though to be fair the rares are kind of an afterthought and are basically never used. The reason why newer gacha games have less rarities is actually pretty simple. In older games, the lower rarities were typically used as like some kind of enhancement fodder or a resource of some kind, since they're easy to obtain, usually by grinding. In FGO, for example, lower rarity units can be used as XP in case you don't want to use your more valuable, higher rarity XP cards. In GFL, the 2 stars are used to enhance other characters' stats, and the higher rarities can be dismantled for cores on other units too. And in Azure Lane, the commons are used again as enhancement fodder, and the higher rarities are retired for medals to exchange for other units or items in the shop. But in newer games, there's no longer an easy way to obtain characters. Typically, the only way you're able to get more characters is by rolling the gacha. So with less characters overall, the less of a need gacha games have these days of separating their rosters into like multiple rarities. There is one exception among the gachas I play, and that would be Arknights, which makes sense because I see it as a sort of like a bridge between old school and new school. Even though it has a lot of new school gacha features, one of the few old school traits that it does have is that it has 6 different rarities of units, going from the 1-star robots all the way up to the limited 6 stars. But rather than be used as enhancement fodder like in other old school gachas, the lower rarities are designed to be easy to use and level up so that new players can get as far as they can into story or event content quickly until they can grind enough to level up stronger, higher rarity units who can handle the harder content. And lastly, the grinding. Oh dear god, the grind, dude. Old school gacha games are infamous for being grindy as fuck, to an extent that if you've never played an older gacha game before, or even other genres that are known for being grindy like an MMO, like it's gonna be pretty hard for you to wrap your head around just how grindy the old school gachas were, or perhaps still are. In Azure Lane at launch, for example, you couldn't feed units with XP items to give them XP directly like you can now, or just in most gacha games in general. You had to manually grind XP for them the good old-fashioned RPG way of toss them out into battle. You also had to grind for weapon blueprints, and the top tier ones back in the day were rare event map drops, and that you couldn't obtain anywhere else. Like, I still remember back during Anime Expo 2019, we had an event going on at the same time as the con, so I was walking around the LA Convention Center with my tablet in one hand playing Azure Lane, and my phone in the other since my tablet was tethering off my phone, grinding blueprints for the French 138.6mm destroyer gun. Hell, the priority units that I mentioned earlier are characters that you can only obtain by grinding, so no getting lucky on gacha or anything like that, since the idea is that you can obtain some of the best characters in the game if you put in the work for them. And back in the day, PR grinding was absolutely atrocious because of how restrictive the grind used to be. Jesus, where do I start in GFL, bro? The problem here is that this game has so much shit that you have to grind. You have characters who need to be obtained from gacha or from events, leveled up, limit broken, and enhanced. Oh, and by the way, some characters also have mod 3 upgrades that are meta as fuck, so you better upgrade their asses. They also need gear that also need to be obtained either from gacha or from events, enhanced and calibrated. You've got the damn fairies that you have to obtain from construction gacha first, then level up and enhance. You have the coalition girls that you not only have to roll from their own separate gacha banners for, but you also have to give them their own coalition minions that also need to be leveled up, limit broken, and enhanced, all with their own separate resource pipelines that are separate from the ones that you use to level up your normal units. You have your HOC artillery squads that, surprise surprise, need their own resources to be leveled up, limit broken, and enhanced. And lastly, you have a goddamn main battle tank and a mech to take care of, because why the hell not? And whatever you do not ask a girls frontline player what corpse dragging is. But by far the worst grind that I've ever had the displeasure of doing was for FGO. The sheer amount of grind that you have to put in for a single 5-star character in this game, if you're a new player at least, is ludicrous. Like, the amount of materials that characters need, especially at higher rarities, is insane. Material drops are RNG, meaning that the amount of time that you need to farm everything that you need to level up a character can vary greatly depending on your luck. A lot of materials that you need for newer characters are locked behind later story chapters, so if you're not all caught up with the story, you might be fucked. But worst of all, FGO to this day does not have any kind of like built-in auto farming feature. This game has always been intended for you to grind everything manually, and because this is a turn-based game, right, you have to input commands for your teams every single turn, which means that grinding in this game is dreadfully tedious. So, of course, this has to be the one gacha game where we have dedicated events where you do nothing but grind the fuck out of the game, like lotteries and raids. In comparison, every single new school gacha I've ever played, with the exception of like maybe Arknights, the grind has been nowhere near as bad or as god fucking awful as the old school ones. And this makes sense too, because as more gacha games come out and the gacha market becomes steadily more and more saturated, people can only play so many of them at once, and the vast majority of gacha players certainly don't want to sit down and play a dozen of them at once like me. So new school gacha games have evolved over time in order to better attract new players for themselves by streamlining the grind that's required for them and or reducing the overall amount of grind in the first place. Gacha games these days have things like auto farming, multi-running, which is when a gacha lets you pay the stamina cost of multiple runs of a farming node up front, but you only need to complete it once yourself, and sweeping, which is like multi-running, but you don't even need to manually finish a run yourself. The game just automatically gives you the rewards for as many runs as you have the stamina for. And for open world games like Genshin and WoWa, you can even farm for some of the materials that your characters and weapons need by collecting them directly or by killing enemies that drop them in the overworld. So it's at least fun to, run around beating the shit out of enemies while farming, rather than do like dozens, if not hundreds of runs on the same node over and over for hours on end. So whenever you hear a Genshin player or anyone else who's only ever played like the big trendy gacha games bitch about how grindy their games are, right? Kindly remind them that it used to be so much fucking worse. One last thing I forgot to mention, in newer gacha games, going through story is super easy, or in other words, story battles are rarely ever challenging since they're designed for even casual players to be able to get through easily. Hell, on 2 separate occasions, MiHoYo felt the need to make a story fight easier. First, the Tartaglia boss fight in Genshin, and second, the Aventurine boss fight in Star Rail, because casuals thought they were too hard. But for old school gachas, story content is oftentimes legitimately challenging, sometimes even just straight up bullshit. The Chronology boss fight at the end of Lost Belt 6 in FGO, basically every late game story chapter in Girls Frontline 1, at Worlds 12 and up in Azure Lane, just to name a few examples. This is because unlike newer gachas that isolate their endgame content into their own dedicated endgame modes like Spiral Abyss, MOC, Shiyu Defense, or TOA, older gachas don't do this, and so they integrate their endgame content into the story itself, in addition to making them a part of their events. And those are the main things that separate old school gacha games from the new school ones in my experience with them over the years. Hope you enjoyed listening to what was basically a gacha history lesson by a dude who's been playing them for way too long. If you liked it, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more. I also dual stream to both YouTube and Twitch, twitch.tv/ToaSniper98, so stop by on either channel, doesn't matter which, if you want to hang out and talk about gacha. Check out the Patreon too if you want to see your name show up at the end of these videos, and until next time, be cool y'all, and see you in the next one.